The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to today's webinar entitled Hitting the Sweet Spot Integrated Asset Management. My name's Billy Zadig, Manager Special Programs for APA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to the web page under the Continuous Learning tab later today. Professional continuing education certificates are being offered for today's program. Those who indicated they wanted a certificate at registration and meet the requirements will receive certificates later this afternoon. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by our presenter. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to our speaker for today's webinar, Bill Roth. Bill, take it away.
Thank you very much, Billy, and thank you all very much for joining us today. I'm really excited to walk through the integrated asset management idea and concept with everybody here. Our agenda for the presentation, we'll start with just a brief introduction for those of you who don't know who I am. Do a quick intro, do a couple of three poll questions to set the table for the rest of the presentation. Hopefully I can tailor some of the content for the rest of the presentation based on the feedback that you guys are able to give us. And then I'm just going to dive in and talk about what do we mean by integrated asset management and what do we mean by hitting the sweet spot. And then we've got time at the end for Q&A, so I'm very excited to answer any questions that you may have on the subject. So real quick, I am Bill Roth, President and CEO of Roth IAMS, co-founder of SLAM Technologies. I was telling Billy earlier, there's tornado winds here in Tampa, so I'm going to leave my camera off and just let this picture do the talking for me today. So I've got about 28 years experience working with higher ed institutions across North America on helping them address their facility and infrastructure asset management challenges, and have been a proud member of APA, many of the regional chapters as well as state chapters, and believe that the organization is a great and collaborative way to share best practices, and really proud to be speaking to you today as part of the webinar series. So to set the table, we'll go ahead with our first of three poll questions. Excellent. So looks like maintenance planning is the number one responsibility, but it certainly looks like many of you are involved in all of the phases of asset management that we've presented here. Excellent. Well, we're going to touch on all of these areas over the course of the next little bit. Let's go to the next question, please, Billy. So how far into the future do you plan prioritize capital plans? A lot at 5, some at 3, not many at 1, which is great. And only 7% of what's planning. Excellent. So it looks like 5% is over 50%, which is great. Last poll question, please. So how many different departments or stakeholders provide input into your capital planning process? One to 5, pretty even split actually. 1 to 5 seems to be the most. Just has a slight lead out there, which is great. I'm really excited that there's some organizations that have more than 11 stakeholder groups involved, because that collaboration is really important. So thank you very much for sharing, and hopefully, as I say, I'll be able to tailor a little bit of what we're going to talk about today based on what I heard. So I want to talk about, so I guess first of all, the term asset management is kind of like the term sustainability, in that you could fly a 747 through the different, the range of definitions that different people and organizations have about asset management. And so when we talk about asset management, we talk about it from an integrated asset management perspective. And so we want to define what it is, and really it's more, if the Roth IAMS, the name of our company is Integrated Asset Management Strategies. And so we think it's important that people understand, what do we mean when we say integrated asset management, and why do we recommend not just asset management, but integrated asset management for organizations to help tell their story as it relates to their facility and infrastructure. So what does integrated asset management look like? And so there's three main areas that we think that organizations, if they focus on, can truly achieve integrated asset management, not just asset management. And the first of those areas we call capital planning excellence. And a lot of folks will say, well, why is that the first area? We don't have to do any capital renewals early on in our ownership of a building. For the first 10 years, everything's under warranty, it's working pretty well. Why do you recommend capital planning excellence first, as opposed to focusing on O&M and other things like that take place on day one? Well, we're not talking about the act of just doing it. We're talking about achieving excellence in it. And the reason that we say getting your house in order from a capital planning perspective, understanding your deferred capital renewal and maintenance backlog and things like that, because from a risk management perspective, when critical elements within a facility or on a campus fail, buildings close down, kids get sent home, programs are interrupted. And so from that perspective, and for that primary reason associated with risk management, we recommend you start with capital planning excellence. Doesn't mean you're not doing, you're not doing the other things that fall into asset management. It just means if you're going to get excellent at one thing, or you're just starting out, we recommend you start with capital planning. You may have also noticed I used the term deferred capital renewal and maintenance. If you've heard me speak before, did a webinar last week, I talked about this as well. We are on a mission to abolish the term deferred maintenance from the vernacular of facility and infrastructure asset management. The majority of the costs that are part of folks' quote unquote DM or deferred maintenance numbers are actually capital renewal. And so it doesn't have to be our terminology of deferred capital renewal and maintenance, but we believe that using the term deferred maintenance when you're talking to financial and non-facilities folks confuses the issue and is actually hurting our case to secure additional funding to address what is primarily capital renewal. There is still some maintenance, which is why we don't just call it deferred capital renewal. We call it deferred capital renewal and maintenance. So when we talk about capital planning, it's really about understanding your deferred capital renewal and maintenance backlog and developing plans to address it and mitigate and manage the risks associated with element failure. So sorry for those who've heard me on my soapbox about deferred maintenance, but I figure if I keep it up, maybe we can continue to drive the term deferred maintenance out of the vernacular for folks. The next area of integrated asset management is operational excellence. So this is where we're looking to optimize and enhance preventative maintenance planning, move from more reactive maintenance, which again, when I talk to a lot of organizations, I often hear, oh, it's 90-10 or 80-20 reactive to preventative. Obviously, as you look to enhance your operational programs, moving from that reactive process to more of a preventative, and ideally as technology continues to advance and move into the real property sector, looking at predictive maintenance and other things like that, just becoming excellent at the O&M within the facility. So it's not just about the planning of preventative maintenance, but it's the execution of that maintenance. It's the extension of the life cycle of the elements within your facilities, which again will help enhance and improve your capital planning situation. So the overlap between capital planning excellence and operational excellence is really where you're looking to extend the life of those critical elements within the building so that you have less deferred capital renewal and maintenance because you're allowing your building elements to last longer. The third element of integrated asset management, when we talk about it, is what we call performance excellence. And so this is moving beyond just operating the building, but optimizing the building and the building systems. So this is looking at things like, are the systems within the building operating at peak efficiency? Are you maximizing the benefit of the indoor environment to, in your case, the educational programs and the research programs that you're looking to deliver through your buildings? Is your building automation or building management system controlling the buildings to be as efficient as possible, reducing energy and also reducing the generation of greenhouse gases? And obviously, the more optimized that systems are, the lower your O&M costs, and also likely the better they're going to perform over the long term because they are operating as designed. And so when we talk about integrated asset management, really hitting the sweet spot is for an organization to be achieving capital planning excellence, operational excellence, performance excellence, and all of the values and benefits that come from that sweet spot right in the middle of the diagram. So how is it achieved? So there's we've talked about the idea or the concept. How does an organization go about working towards achieving integrated asset management? And so the framework that we're going to walk through here, folks, over the next little bit is, we call it the onion, and you start in the center and you work your way out. However, most organizations over the course of even a year or multiple years of a program will bounce back and forth within this framework over the course of a planning cycle or multiple planning cycles. So it's not a linear process. However, we're going to talk about it from the inside or the core of the onion out. So the first thing that an organization really needs to do is understand two key aspects of where you are currently. One is, what are our business objectives? What are our key strategic goals as an organization, as a university or a college? And how do the assets that we're looking to manage support those goals and those objectives? How can we communicate to our stakeholders in such a way that their goals and objectives are aligned with our goals and objectives for our facilities? What we want to try to do, folks, is a lot of non-facilities folks will look at their buildings, their infrastructure, more as a cost of doing business, whereas we want to change that perspective, because what do you do with cost? Typically, organizations will look to cut costs. However, if you can change the perspective from looking at it as a cost to looking at it as an asset, then I truly believe that we will start to address some of the challenges that we have. Because again, you cut costs, but when you have an asset, you're more likely to invest in that asset. So understanding the objectives of your organization and how you can tie your facility objectives, what does success look like for your facilities, to what does success look like for the overall organization, you'll be in a much better perspective of being able to communicate effectively with all the different stakeholders across your organization. That's sort of about the engagement and the ability to get momentum in the program. The second aspect at the core of the onion is your existing building processes or processes. Depending on, asset management in a lot of ways is an exercise in change management, because most organizations recognize even if they have a good program today, they want to look at continuous improvement. So really understanding where you're starting from is critical. That's the first step. What processes do we have in place? What are we doing? How are we doing things today? How is our team set up? What is our organizational structure? All of these things. That's the first part of it. But then the second part of it is also to understand how flexible is my organization? How open to change are we? How willing to evolve are we? If your organization is fairly nimble and fairly flexible, you can push the envelope with how far you go in the early days of any program evolution. If your organization is a little bit more tried and true, we've always done it this way, change averse, then you probably don't want to, you probably want to take baby steps in the early stages of your asset management program, because otherwise if you try to leap too far and the organization isn't able or willing to come with you, then it's going to be a lot harder to gain momentum in the early days, which really a lot of this is about, gaining that momentum and that traction. So what are our overall business objectives? How can we tie into those? What are our current processes and procedures, and how far can we stretch as we go forward and build out this program? So that's sort of the first part of the framework. The second part is where we start to look at our data. What is our desired data set? And so once you know what your objectives are and what your processes are and how far you want to go, what type of questions do I want to answer, that sort of thing, then you can start to look at data. What data do I have? Where is it? How up to date is it? How confident am I in that data? What data don't I have? How can I get it? What is the cost associated with getting it? What is the time frame associated with getting it? And so this is where you define what we call your desired data set. That is the data, all the data that you wish you had on your building. And again, depending on where you are and your ability and capacity for change, as well as available funding to gather that data, either internally or using third-party resources, what data do I want to get? And then it's about going out and gathering that data. That data can be many different things. And so when we start talking about the types of data sets that are critical for existing facilities, this is what we call our hierarchy of existing facility data needs. And I know that's a really long title, but the most important thing here is this is for existing facilities. If you were going to start from scratch and design a building, you would probably turn this pyramid upside down and start focusing first on sustainability and functionality and working your way up to concerning yourself with the types of equipment and the maintenance and the operations and all of those things that you would do, because you're starting with a blank sheet of paper. And so when we talk about existing facility data needs, this is where the bricks and mortar are in place, the students are in the classrooms, the researchers are in the laboratories, and the residents are all in the dorms. And so the foundation, the most granular level of data that we're normally concerned with is the inventory data set, so the equipment inventory. So this is individual pieces of equipment. This is the level of detail where we recommend folks and organizations focus their preventative maintenance planning. So in this particular case, if you've got 3 boilers in a mechanical room, you're going to have boiler number 1 with make, model, serial number. You're going to tag it. Boiler number 2, make, model, serial number, a different tag, so on and so forth. It's the most granular data set, which is why it's sort of at the base of we call this the pyramid. So we have the onion and the pyramid that we're going to go through today. The next layer up is the condition data set or data stream, and this is at a slightly higher level typically than the inventory. This is at what we call the element level. And so you could, in that last example I gave, you have 3 boilers in a mechanical room. In your inventory, boiler number 1, boiler number 2, boiler number 3. For your condition assessment, let's assume they're all, they were all installed at the same time, they're approximately the same size, and they're all in approximately the same condition. You could have an element in a facility condition assessment that says boilers quantity 3. Or boilers quantity, a sum of the capacity of each of those boilers. So instead of 3 individual data points, you have 1 data point, which says boilers quantity 3, condition X, remaining useful life, cost, so on and so forth. So the data tends to be less granular. Now, in an instance, if you had, say you had 2 original boilers and 1 new boiler, in that case, in a condition assessment, you ought to expect to have two different elements. One that is boilers quantity 2, date of installation 1984. One is boilers quantity 1, date of installation 2020, and they would have different conditions and different recommendations for future replacement. But ultimately, your condition data is typically less granular than your inventory and operations. Now, that being said, most organizations won't inventory everything within their facilities. The majority of folks focus on mechanical and electrical and some localized architectural elements, sometimes like door closures and things like that. Whereas a condition assessment, typically you're going to look at all of the elements within a building. So you may have data in your condition data set that you don't necessarily have tied back to your inventory. The reason, kind of back to the diagram we showed previously, the Venn diagram with capital planning excellence, operational excellence, and performance excellence. One of the other reasons that we recommend you start with capital planning excellence is that because the condition assessment data set is less granular, it's a little bit easier to maintain. You typically have far fewer lines of data, and when you're starting out a program, managing that data is really a critical phase. And so if you have less data to manage, it's easier to cut your teeth on managing a condition data set because it doesn't change as frequently and it's less granular than an inventory data set. The next tier of the pyramid is code and environmental, and these are issues like grandfathered code issues, ADA, hazardous materials like asbestos and other things like that. And the reason, these are often in many cases legal regulations that mandate how you deal and address these issues. However, most often they are grandfathered so that when you have to deal with them, it's typically triggered by something that comes from a renewal project or a renovation project that is typically driven by condition ratings. So that's why it's sort of one tier above. Code and environmental and condition are what we like to call the have to knows, because obviously if you ignore, you don't have to have an inventory. A lot of organizations don't, but if you don't understand, and I mean, honestly, you don't have to have any of this data, but in reality, if you don't understand the condition of your portfolio, there's a much higher risk or likelihood that critical elements are going to fail. And obviously from a risk management perspective, you don't want that to happen. From a legal perspective, if you don't understand what your liabilities are around these grandfathered code and environmental issues, you can get in big trouble, and whether that just be regulatory trouble or financial trouble where you plan a project but you don't understand that risk or that liability when you trigger or break the grandfather clause. Last thing you want to do is budget a $500,000 project that turns out to be $750,000 because of code or environmental issues. So that's why we call those the have-to-haves. The next two tiers, the final two tiers, functionality and sustainability, those we call the nice-to-haves as it relates to existing buildings. Because if you don't, and not to say they're not important, but you can get by without addressing these issues in a lot of cases from a risk management perspective. So that's really what we're talking about, have-to-haves and nice-to-haves is from a risk management perspective. That being said, to truly optimize your capital renewal plan and your maintenance plan, you want to understand how functional are the buildings and the spaces within your buildings as it relates to delivering your programs across your campuses, whether that is the academic program, ancillary, residence, athletics, any of those programs. How effective are your buildings in delivering those programs? And when you're doing things like renewals and renovations, how can you enhance the functionality of that space, as well as the sustainability? So from an efficiency perspective, this is all about carbon greenhouse gas reduction, carbon reduction, energy efficiency. How do we make the building perform better so that we're reducing the impact that we have while improving the overall environment? Again, not that it's unimportant, but the reason that it's at the top is a lot of people a little bit less so recently, but a lot of people 10 years ago put a lot of money into sustainability initiatives, but they never achieved the value for them because, frankly, some of the money trickled down to the lower layers of the pyramid when elements within buildings failed, or they didn't take a holistic view of the building. And if you put a really high efficiency HVAC system in a building that has a really leaky envelope, you're going to blow all your really efficient conditioned air out your windows and lose a lot of that efficiency. So this is when we talk to customers, it's important to understand all of these different data streams, but we sort of look at this as, you know, from the foundation of granular through the have to haves, through the nice to haves at the top. So once we look at the data, then the next layer of the onion is the tools. And so frankly, Excel is one of the most powerful tools that we see organizations use. That being said, Excel is great for small data sets and for manual data manipulation. Excel is not a great tool for large organizations or where you want to do complex visualization or reporting or data updates. It's a very manual process. So it's a great first place to start. But you know what we're talking about here can be project management software, computerized maintenance management system, integrated workplace management systems, capital asset management systems, all the different technologies that you use, enterprise resource planning, financial systems, all the different tools that are going to factor into your asset management program. And really important, we see a lot of folks put the cart before the horse, and they buy a tool before they understand their data or their business objectives and processes where they're starting from. And then they try to fit their data and fit their processes into those tools. And this is why we see, this is particularly true for computerized maintenance management systems. And this is why we see a lot of folks, you know, not very happy with their CMMS system because, you know, and it's in a lot of cases, it's not always, or the only issue isn't that the work order system isn't any good, it's that it may be the wrong tool for the type of data you're looking to manage, or the type of questions you're trying to answer, or the type of analysis that you're trying to do. So our recommendation is always understand the data that you're trying to manage and manipulate, and then go determine what the best tool is for that job. We also believe that there's no one facility asset management software that does everything well. If there was one system that did all the different things that facility and asset management professionals wanted it to do, everybody would be using it. And we just don't think that it exists. And so we're more supportive of pick the best tool for your data set, but then make sure that the tool you pick is also able to integrate with other tools. So if you have a work order system, or if you're looking for a work order system, will it integrate with your financial system? Does it have a capital asset management module? If it does it do what you want? If not, go get a capital planning software, but make sure that it will integrate with your work order system and your financial system. If you have a project management system, will it be able to receive data from either your work order system or your capital planning system? So the key here is know the data that you're trying to manage, know what you're trying to do with it, know those questions you're trying to answer from the core of the onion, and then pick the best software or softwares to deliver the different functionality that you want for your portfolio. But the key is make sure they integrate. And integration is not as big an issue as it was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. There were a lot more closed systems, if you will, quote unquote, where software didn't want to share data with other software packages. We see a lot less of that going forward. Most software is open to integration. It's important you understand what that is, how easy it is, and looking at the different types of integration. Is it a flat file where you create an Excel or a CSV file from one database and you import it into the other, or are you looking for an API, which is a live data transfer? So there's lots of complexity around integration too, and that's a topic for another presentation. But I just want to drive home the importance of getting the right tool for your data set, not trying to fit your data set into a tool that you've already picked first. Because honestly, if it works, you're lucky. And we don't recommend a lot of strategies that rely too heavily on luck to be successful. So that's tools. So we're halfway through the framework now, the first 3 layers. The next is really where we start talking about prioritization. Because frankly, I've been in this business for almost 30 years, and for at least 26 of the 28 years that I've been in this business, everybody that I've met has said, we don't have enough money to do it, or resources, whether that's money or people or time or whatever it is. We do not have enough resources to do what we want to do or know we should do. Now, the reason I say for the last 2 years is with all of the unprecedented government funding that was injected into the economy as a result of the pandemic a couple years ago, and that is still working its way through the system in some cases. Some organizations have found themselves not necessarily with more money than they need based on their deferred capital renewal or their desired preventive maintenance program, but more money than they can spend. And so, which was a new thing for me when I spoke to customers. And so, I actually have met one higher ed institution that does have a plan to eliminate all their deferred capital renewal and maintenance over, I believe it's a 5-year period. They're the only one that I've met that has enough money to do everything they need to do. But some folks in the last couple of years, as I said, have found themselves in a position where they have more money than they can actually spend, whether that's because of market capacity, supply chain, other issues. So what all this is to say that we have to prioritize. What projects are we going to do? And what projects aren't we going to do? What preventative maintenance tasks are we going to do on what specific equipment? And what are we going to choose not to do? Because we simply don't have the staff or the money or the market capacity or the ability to acquire the equipment in order to do the other things that we want to do. And so the tools that you pick should help support the prioritization, which is why prioritization sits on top of tools in the framework or in the onion. And so the key for priority is to, again, it all flows back to the center of the onion. What are we trying to achieve? So how do we link that priority? How do we develop a priority structure that supports our business objectives, relies on the data that we have, and is delivered through the tools that we've selected to manage our project? And so a lot of organizations will use categorical priority, right? High, medium, low, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, anything like that. The problem with that is almost everybody will run out of money, typically in the middle of their high priority projects. And so how do you answer the awkward question of which high is higher than high? This is where prioritization comes in. And this is where we feel that you need to have numerical priorities so that you can rank order your projects, so that it's not, so that you're not left with 100 high priority projects and you can only fund 20 of them. Well, how do you pick? Well, we just, we randomly pick, we do this, we do that. It's hard to defend that and explain that. So by having a numerical priority system that will score each recommendation that you have, or a numerical priority system that will score how you build your preventative maintenance program or how you enhance your overall asset management program, is helpful to explain and lay out to your stakeholders, why did we pick this project over that project? And so you want to have not only a numerical priority, but almost an explanation or a roadmap that helps you tell your story to your stakeholders, so that if one of your board members' pet projects is not on the list, well, hey, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you focusing on this building or that building? You're able to communicate that to them very quickly and easily with an answer that is tied into, supporting your overall organization's goals and objectives. And so understanding the priority, what is important to you, how do you keep track of that? Now, there's other from a capital planning perspective, there's other renewal reasons that you'll do work. You may decide not to do things because, we're going to demolish that building or divest that building in the next couple of years, so we're not going to spend any money fixing it up. Or, we just hired a new professor and we have to build a new lab in this building, so we're going to renovate the whole floor. So there's drivers and there's reasons and there's priority that have nothing to do with risk management and other factors like that. And so that's where the numerical priority becomes decision support, because there are other reasons why you'll choose not to do or to do some things. And that's where that roadmap comes in handy, so that you can communicate that, where it's not just based on your numerical priority system. And obviously things change over time, and so priority, you don't want it to change, daily, weekly, monthly, but every year or 2 years, you're going to want to look at the priority structure that you put in place. It should always include risk management, so the risk of failure and the consequence of failure applied to your buildings and the elements within those buildings, but it should also include other factors that have nothing to do with the risk management. If you don't use any priority, risk management is a great place to start, but because again, the risk of failure, consequence of failure is a pretty standard model, and a lot of your stakeholders will understand it, but we suggest you build beyond just that, because again, an easy example is if you just look at risk management, you're never going to do any finishes or aesthetics within your buildings. And frankly, if all of your buildings have solid risk management, but they look terrible and no one will want to come and live in them if it's a residence, or learn in them or teach in them if it's an academic building, that's going to hurt your overall performance of your organization. And so it's about finding the balance, the right balance for each and every one of you and your own individual institutions. So with the prioritization, this is where you can start to tell your story and either allocate the monies that you have, or in a perfect world, try to advocate for more funding. And so that's why we call this budgeting, financing, planning, whatever you want to call it. This is about basically filling up the buckets of money that you have now, but using the prioritization, using the tools to help you tell your story to try to get more money. So, a lot of organizations have struggled, over the last 20, 25 years to get more funding. I can say right now, the ones that were able to base their story on the overall business objectives of their organization, gather consistent data, use their tools to help prioritize and tell that story, have been the most successful at getting additional funding outside of, as I said, the pandemic-related stimulus, because there was a lot of money injected into the system over a large area and a large number of associations, geographies, all the rest of it. So I think we would all agree that that money was welcome, but hopefully, we're not seeing another global pandemic that will drive another heavy stimulus to fund operations, maintenance, and capital renewal in our portfolios. But we were able to get it. And so this is really about trying to spend your money wisely, which has been very difficult over the last little while because of inflation, supply chain, and labor shortages. But this is really where you're setting aside and you're building your budget, you're building your plans, you're prioritizing them, and then this is that 1 year, 3 year, 5 year planning process. I was really happy to see a lot of folks at 5 and many more at 3. 1 year plans are very rigid, because they're it's just, hey, here's everything we're going to do. If there's what we're going to do this year, and there's everything else. And so there's typically one plan and then a giant pond full of other issues that is not prioritized and sitting out there. So by having a multi-year plan, 3-year plan, 5-year plan, you have the ability to move things around. If you run out of money and you need something to move on, you don't just drop it. You don't just throw the fish back in the pond. You actually move it to your second year of your plan. If you get more money, you're able to go, hey, let's take our highest priority projects in year 2 and bring them forward. So that planning process gives you a lot of flexibility to achieve more value for money. And then once the last or the outer layer of the onion is really where you get to work on designing, doing the projects, doing the preventative maintenance, doing the renewal, doing the enhancements to your building automation system that support those 3 different areas of excellence that are part of integrated asset management. The last part here that I really want to focus on, though, is the monitoring, because a lot of organizations will build a plan, they'll set expectations, they'll go do stuff, but they don't bother to go back and monitor and say, hey, did we achieve what we said we were going to do? Did we achieve the energy savings we said we were going to do? Did we reduce the reactive maintenance by increasing the preventative maintenance as we projected? And you know, because it's really just, okay, let's go do it, and it's all focused on the doing. But the monitoring is important for a bunch of reasons. One, it allows you, if you did achieve what you expected, it allows you to help enhance and improve your story and say, hey, look what we did with this first step. We achieved the results we got. Can I have some more money so that I can do the next batch of things and deliver on the next set of goals that we're going to set? If you didn't achieve those goals, understanding why you didn't so you can communicate it and course correct going forward is important. And by monitoring, it tells you more or less where you are now, and where your current state is now and what your current processes and things are, so that feeds back into the core of the onion, where you'll start all over again in your cycle and your thought process. So what does it look like in action? And again, this is more of an annual planning process. So we'll start at the top. Where are we now? That's sort of at the beginning of your planning year. You know, let's look ahead. You know, let's look ahead at the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, however long we're planning. Where do we want to go? What do we want to try to achieve over the course of this year, and how much do we think it's going to cost? Do we have all the data that we need? If we don't, let's go get the data we need to make the best decisions. Once we have that data, you know, what's most important to you and your organization? That's the priority piece. Building your plan, putting it together, engaging your stakeholders, telling your story, and then putting the plan to work. And again, the last stage, which is the one that a lot of people don't think about, is, did you get the results you expected? And in order to do that, you need to monitor, and you also need to keep your data up to date. And that's one of the key areas where a lot of organizations fall down as well, is they go do all this work, but the monitoring doesn't just include, did we achieve the results we wanted or expected? It's also about, did we keep the data up to date so we know where we are now with our new deferred capital renewal backlog numbers, with our new facility condition assessments, with our new preventative maintenance programs, and all the rest of it. So folks, that's sort of a walkthrough of what we call integrated asset management. So I hope that this gave you some ideas, some thoughts. If there's any questions, I would love to have an opportunity to answer them over the next 15 or so minutes.
Thank you, Bill. I have a question for you.
Sure.
With using the term, I think you said preventive or when you want to change the term, how much pushback do you get when you start talking about not using that preventive terminology anymore?
Billy, are you talking about the deferred maintenance versus deferred capital renewal and maintenance?
Yes, I am. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure I was answering the right question, because there's a whole question about preventative and predictive maintenance as well. So I just wanted to make sure I was answering the right question. For the most part, at first everybody kind of resists to some extent, because everybody's so used to the term deferred maintenance, and DM is a whole lot easier to say than DCRM and all the rest of it. But once we've had the opportunity to explain the reasoning, a lot of folks, don't argue with the reasoning. That being said, a lot of the stakeholders are also used to hearing the term DM, so it's going to take a concerted effort. It's not just about us, the facilities folks, changing our terminology. We also have to make sure that all of our stakeholders' terminology understand the difference and understand the nuance of why we're changing it, so that they don't just default to the easier to say deferred maintenance or DM versus deferred capital renewal and maintenance and DCRM. It's human nature, I guess, to some extent.
Well, thank you. That's always been a question in my mind. So thank you very much because I hear a lot of people who use the term, and then I hear presenters who think the same way that you do, that it's not a good use of the word. So right now we don't have any questions in the chat box. So people, if you have some questions for Bill, please type them in. So while we're doing that, I want to say, Bill, thank you so much for, once again, second week in a row, you hit it out of the park. So thank you so much for doing this and for Roth Imes being one of our presenters. So we let everybody know we have two more. Oh, okay, here you go. Curious to hear your thoughts on which components of the hierarchy of existing facility data is most important or order of priority.
No, that's a great question, Rex. And I think, and again, if we go back to the Venn diagram, we would start with the condition data set, the condition and the regulatory and environmental data sets. So the second and third tier of the pyramid. Here, I can go back to that slide. So yeah, we would recommend condition and code. That's why we call those the must-haves, because from a risk management perspective, like I said before, right, things will fail and then potentially students get sent home. The environmental, again, in most cases, it's regulated, it's required, it's in some cases illegal to not manage those issues. After that, I would say the equipment inventory is next. And then the functionality and sustainability, it really ties, which one is more important there, I would say really ties into those overall business objectives and goals of your organization, would determine which one of those two has a slightly higher priority. But definitely condition and code, we call those the have-to-haves or the must-haves, because we do think that those are the most important. And they tie into that capital planning excellence, which we talked about in the Venn diagram. We need a better name for this one, because we have the onion, we have the pyramid, we have the wheel, which is the last one. We need maybe a better catchy name here, but that's why capital planning excellence is the first part that we recommend there.
Okay, well, thank you. Our next question is, any suggestions on how to start an asset tagging program? How often should the data be validated, and what kind of internal processes can be created to have an updated data set?
So the most important place to start in designing an asset tagging program is as Stephen Covey used to say, begin with the end in mind. And so it's important that you create a data set that you have the capacity to manage. And what I mean by that is, when you're all said and done, whether you gather the data yourselves or you work with a third party to gather the data, that you have the capacity and the processes in place to keep that data up to date. And so there are hundreds of different types of equipment that you could tag in your building. We recommend, and again, depending on how nimble your organization is, how many resources your organization has, if the more resources you have, the more nimble you are, the bigger you can start, the more pieces of equipment you can gather early on, because the more resources will be needed to keep it up to date in the long run. We always recommend you start with the most critical pieces of equipment, HVAC equipment, major electrical equipment, that sort of thing, and work your way down from a consequence of failure as well as a cost perspective. And so those are sort of the two key things to ask is, can we keep this data set up to date? In terms of how often you do keep it up to date, we recommend once you have it, that you integrate the data management and the data updates into your regular maintenance procedures. So if you have a piece of equipment and you have a work order to change out that piece of equipment, we would recommend that part of the process of that, the last step of that work order, is to apply a tag and gather make, model, serial number in real time on that new piece of equipment that came in, because it's a lot harder to create that habit and that process. But honestly, if you were to go back at the end of a year and forensically try to determine how many pieces of equipment you changed out, it's going to be a lot harder. So real-time data updates for asset tagging is always the way we recommend to go. It is a challenge because it does, it does take some change management. It does add one extra step to the removal process. Actually, it's two steps. You have to basically archive or retire the old equipment, the tag, the number, all of it, and create a new one for that new piece of equipment. But in the long run, that's the easiest way to do it, because you're not, 6 months or a year later going, okay, what did we do again, and sitting down and trying to figure it all out.
Okay. Our next one is great overview. What has been a typical time frame for developing the full process for organizations that have not had the ability to develop a similar program?
Oh, that's a great question. So many of the issues that we're facing have been decades in the making, right? We've been underfunding capital renewal for probably 50 or 60 years. We've been reducing the number of maintenance staff that we have on campuses for decades. So this to truly achieve the benefits of a program like this, you got to take a long view. The other aspect is so there's some macro issues that get in the way, because money's not the solution, right? If you have $1 billion worth of deferred capital renewal and maintenance, if somebody wrote you a check for $1 billion, you don't have the capacity to do all that work. The market doesn't have the capacity. You're just going to drive further inflation, supply chain issues, all of those sorts of things. So so it's years. The other thing you have to look at is, again, as I said before, how nimble is your organization? If your organization is fairly flexible, is not change averse, you can make some of these foundational changes quicker than if you're dealing with an organization that is sort of tried and true. We've always done it this way. But to truly take a situation from we're getting worse to we're getting less worse to we're getting better, it can easily take 5, 10 plus years to turn the ship, if you will. The challenge with deferred capital renewal and maintenance is you're never really going to address it, because every year new stuff starts to age out and the condition starts to get worse. But we recommend that you bite off as big a chunk as you can chew as an organization, but not so big you choke, and not so little that you're not stretching yourself.
Our next question is, how do you approach an organization that finds it difficult to find the flexibility to react to the needs determined by an IAM?
I think it, and Daniel, I'm gonna guess that you're talking about, we'll call it resistance from departments or from staff in terms of the flexibility. I hope that's what you mean, because that's kind of how I'm going to answer it. So perfect, thank you, Daniel. So our first step when we're coming into an organization is really to try to get all the stakeholders around the table to have a conversation, because I think one of the biggest things that one of the easiest ways to get people on board is to remind everybody that everybody wants the same thing. Again, when you found your program in the overall business objectives, everybody's trying to achieve those objectives, no matter whether you're construction or capital or maintenance, or you're outside of facilities, your finance, your faculty, your administration. And so getting everybody engaged in the program early, hearing them out. When we talk about prioritization, which is a critical element of it, I know it's in the middle of the framework, but whenever we recommend organizations build it out, we recommend you get as many of your stakeholders together so that they own the result, but they've also had a chance to be heard. So not only will they understand how you got there, but they'll also have some ownership in it. So we really just think, sitting down and getting everybody around a table and reminding everybody that this is why we're doing this, right? I mean, it's start with why. If you're familiar with the Simon Sinek book, that's sort of a personal development book, but we really espouse that as well when you're starting to launch a program like this. Even if you have an organization that is highly collaborative, start with why, found it in those objectives, remind everybody we're all on the same team, and here's how we're going to build out this program. Is it perfect? No. I'll be honest, a lot of organizations I come into, they're like, yeah, you know what, we're gonna work with 4 or 5 departments, and we're gonna wait for old Joe to retire in 2 years because he's never gonna get on board. And we still see that. We try to engage old Joe, and no offense if there's an old Joe online, but it doesn't always work. But getting everybody in a room and engaging everyone, we found, is the best way to do it, although it's not a perfect solution.
Okay, looks like we have time for one more question, and that question is, what would you say is the most prestigious certification in education facilities management to show proficiency?
Ooh. That's a great question. And I'll be honest, I'm not. There's the most prestigious. Wow, that's a tough question. I honestly don't know that I'm qualified to answer that question. I know that there are a number of different organizations, including APA, that have different certification programs. I don't know. I think it depends on your role within the organization and what you're individually trying to achieve. And collectively, I think that the more people with different certifications and perspectives that you can have on a team can be very, very beneficial towards achieving an integrated asset management program. But I apologize, I just don't think I'm qualified to pick the most prestigious.
Well, thank you for your honest answer. Well, that concludes your questions for today. So, Bill, I want to say thank you so much again for a fantastic webinar. And we'll look forward to doing some more next year. So just to remind everybody, we have 2 more webinars for the 2023 webinar season. So, and then we will pick back up again in 2024. So thank you so much, everyone. Bill and Roth Imes for being our presenters today, and to our attendees, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules. So have a great day, and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Thanks, Billy.
You too. Bye-bye now.